Great. All right. Welcome everyone to the Birdability Outreach Program webinar series. Today's topic is an introduction to mindful birding. We're so glad that you are here. We have ASL interpretation by Pro Bono ASL. Many thanks to them. And you also can access closed captioning by clicking on the CC button at the bottom for show captions. We are really grateful for the ways that the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation have supported our work, in particular for the Birdability Outreach Program. And I just want to acknowledge the role that they have in our continued ability to create these spaces for conversations about birding, adaptive birding, and in particular, how we create accessible and inclusive birding spaces for folks with disabilities and other health concerns. Throughout our time today, I want to acknowledge that we will be putting a few things in the chat that are resources that you may want to get to engage with as we end today. But our delight is to have you here in community with us right now with myself, Kalina, and Eric, who are Birdability captains. And I want to also let you know that there are lots of ways to be in community with Birdability around accessible and inclusive birding. And we have some really specific things coming up starting February 27th, which is the fourth Thursday of every month. We'll be hosting a Birdability salon and social hour. That's an opportunity for you to come and talk about backyard birding, to share conversations about birds that you've observed, your practice of mindful birding. It might be an interesting connecting with others about nature journaling. We'll have lots of different breakout rooms for all that. And we'll also be playing Wingspan, which is a game I know many people love, and I'm excited to bring back our Wingspan game night, specifically knowing how wonderful it is to be in community that centers access and inclusion. So we invite you to join us. Please sign up on the website. You can find more information there under our events tab. We also have the next in this series on March 12th that will be focused on adaptive birding equipment. We'll be joined by Paul Miller, Jerry Barrier, and a number of others who will talk about what kinds of adaptive equipment make birding possible for them based on their individual experience and presentation of disability. We hope you'll join us for that. And then May 18th, we're hosting the inaugural first ever Blind Birder Birdathon. We are so psyched about this. I can't even begin to tell you. If you have an interest in joining us, you can find more information on our website. Please also spread the word. This is not only for folks who are already expert birders by ear, but it's for anyone who is legally blind, who's interested in birds and might want some community around that and or to learn more about birding and birding by ear. So please spread the news far and wide if you can do that. With that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I just want to acknowledge that a deep part of what Birdability is about is recognizing that there are as many ways to bird as there are birders. And this feels like a really important thing because sometimes there's an idea that there's one way that we should all be birding. And in fact, part of our goal is expanding our definition of birding to anyone enjoying wild birds, period. And there's a real specific and beautiful way that observing birds can work with our nervous systems, calming our nervous systems, regulating our nervous systems. When we were getting ready for today, I read a book by Lydia Millett called We Loved It All. And She talks about mindfulness in the book, and there was one sentence in particular I sent to Kalina and Eric because it just was so encapsulating of what I often think of as the benefits of mindful birding. And she says, to be suspended beyond the constant process of interpretation, decision, and meaning making that harries our neural pathways. Simply absorb the presence of the world and our presence within it. And when I read that, just again, like I said, a little bit before our opportunity to talk today, it just felt so resonant that I wanted to share it with you all as well. And with that, I would love to introduce Kalina and Eric and ask you to, Kalina, if you want to start to introduce yourselves and maybe share a little bit about why you think I asked you to join today.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kalida. I use they, them pronouns. I am a disabled birder, of course, and I suffer from fibromyalgia and a number of mental health diagnoses, including PTSD. I've talked a lot about mindful birding in our Birdability captain meetings. I've shared a lot about what it means to me, how you can do it, and how you can like incorporate it into various outings that you might have with other birders or other disabled folks in your community. And so it's something that really brings me joy. So I'm excited to be here today.
Yay. Thanks so much for joining us, Kalina. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name's Eric Clow. I've been a birdability captain for about 2 years and have birded in many different ways. I've done the twitching slash listing variety of birding through a lot of it my career, but I think I started from a place of mindful birding because I would spend a lot of time in the backyard just watching the songbirds that would visit our yard. And during that time, I also would kind of journal a bit about the birds and really fell in love with birds in my backyard. And then, I kind of went on a listening journey for a while. And as my condition has kind of progressed over the years, I found that mindful birding, slow birding, stationary birding are ways that I'm able to continue to physically bird. And I still get quite a bit out of it. Um, so yeah, I guess that's a bit about me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if we could just start off maybe talking a little bit about each of our sort of ideas about what mindful birding is and how it differs. You started that actually, Eric, a little bit, how it differs from other approaches to birding. And I think that's a great place for us to start.
Cool. Do you want me to continue then?
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so mindful birding to me is it's about being present with what is around you, and I think listing eBird has kind of become like, ubiquitous among a lot of birders. And so, and while I think that citizen science is super, super important and helpful, and there should be people out there doing that, it can kind of push us into birding in a way that's about what species are there, try to find as many species as you can, try to find how many of each species there are, and that is kind of like our purpose, our mission in birding. And with mindful birding, I see it as, yeah, just being present with what is. If if all you see are blue jays, that's perfectly fine. As much as we all would like to see a bald eagle or, a kestrel or something like that, we just need to kind of accept what is around. And and I think it's about, yeah, I mean, it's really just about that intention of, and that's kind of what the difference is to me. Plus,
Mhm.
I think it's about also being present. So, I mean, there's like the mindfulness aspect of it,
Yeah.
like birding as a meditation. So there's the self-care aspects.
Mm.
There's like the benefits of slowing down, of being present, and those benefits are the same as doing a meditation, I would say. There's really no difference. I think
Mhm.
for me, meditation, I've tried it. It's very difficult, but you put me in a backyard or in a natural space, I will follow a bird and my mind will just absolutely clear.
Yes, I so hear that, Eric. One of the ways I think I really appreciated, Kalina, the ways that you've talked about mindful birding is in a similar probably vein. I also was diagnosed with PTSD. Eventually, that turned into a chronic PTSD or complex PTSD diagnosis years down the line. But one of the joys was when people would say, "Oh, here is a way of stress relief or regulating your nervous system." As a trauma survivor, oftentimes my first thing when I clear my mind is not pleasant. It is not an easy thing for me. And so paying attention to birds was the first time that similarly it made my brain quiet, but in a way that also gave me a focus that allowed me to be present in a calm and grounded and centered way. Kalina, I'm curious about your experience of mindful birding and how you think it differs, from other approaches.
Yeah, so and I've had a lot of the same experiences as you where your nervous system is constantly like looking for threats. And when
Mm,
you focus in on a bird, it kind of closes out all of that constant worry and anxiety.
mm,
Which in my experience on some like trips where we have like target birds and we're rushing
mhm,
around everywhere, that can honestly exacerbate a lot of my issues, and it also puts a lot of stress on my body
mhm.
since the fibromyalgia is also probably a nervous system thing from
Yep,
what I understand of the
yep.
research. And so it wires you up. It makes you very excited in not always the best way. And so
Yes.
with the mindful birding, you're really slowing down. Like I often will just sit down on the ground because I find that very centering. And I mean, there's a reason they call it grounding.
Yeah,
Um, but I'll
100%.
sit down in one spot and just stay there and pay attention to everything that's going on around me, not just the birds, which you can kind of get tunnel vision sometimes, looking all at the birds and not paying attention to
Mhm,
like the kinds of plants they're interacting with or the bugs
mhm,
that they're eating. And those are all super important to understanding birds,
mhm,
which is something that is really important to me. Um,
mhm,
and I think that we miss that a lot of the time.
mhm. It's interesting that you mentioned that, Kalina, in particular, because another birdability captain, Paul Miller, was talking with some of the interns who were part of the accessible birding internship program.
Mhm.
And they were nervous because they were like, we don't know how to identify all the birds. And are folks going to be looking to us? And what are we going to do? And he was so wonderful because his messaging to them was, enjoying a bird does not require knowing its name that we as humans have given it. Like it, it, that can be a part of it. And believe me, I am a both and person. I literally have both and tattooed on my arms so that I consistently remember this. I love to list, right? And at the same time, what is most near to my heart and my practice is that ability to pay deep attention to birds. And that is disconnected from me needing to know exactly their name that we've assigned them. And it's more about paying attention to the insects they're eating, for example, or their behavior. And I just always find that to be such an important part of what I think of when I think of mindful birding. And I want to share because I think having tools sometimes to start can be really useful. And so I'm going to share in the chat for anybody that's interested an accessible mindful birding worksheet activity that we created last September, October, when we did the mental health benefits of birding panel as a way to introduce folks to mindful birding in case that's of use to folks. I'm wondering if you could share, Eric or Kalina, either one, a personal experience where mindfulness enhanced your birding experience.
Sure. I well, there were two things I think I was going to say. I think one is a few years back, I think about for maybe a week, there was a black-chinned hummingbird that was hanging out in our backyard. There was a female or juvenile. I think it was a female though. And it would spend, it would just, it had this favorite perch in a crepe myrtle tree. And so I called her Myrtle and, would just kind of be going down to our sugar feeder and then back up into the tree. And I was just so drawn in by this one hummingbird that I spent just hours sitting on the back porch just watching Myrtle being with Myrtle. And then eventually I, was out late and I kind of went closer to the tree and I was privileged enough to witness a black-chinned hummingbird um, courtship display where there was a male that came down and was doing these big sort of undulating flight paths and Myrtle was there on the branch just like watching the male do his thing and try to woo her and I was fortunate enough to see that happen actually twice in that kind of balmy evening, early evening. And I think that that's like it's kind of like by staying still, paying attention to one bird, being present with that one bird, enabled me to be present for really just an amazing and very intimate experience with these birds, with nature. So I think that that's one thing. I think there's another thing, which is, birders experience we experience a sense of FOMO that is, like,
Oh, that fear of
us,
missing out. Yes.
not unique, but like it's we have our own version of FOMO and it can be incredibly intense. I mean, eBird in some ways can be almost like Facebook. We're just scrolling through people's eBird list going, oh my gosh, they saw an osprey catch a fish. Oh my gosh, and but I think mindful birding is a way to combat that. Oh, right, I should have said FOMO is fear of missing out, of course. Um, but I think that there is that mindfulness can be a way to combat that, a way of saying, you know what, it doesn't matter what other people are seeing. Right now, I'm here and I'm with a lesser goldfinch, and that's all I really need right now. And I'm just gonna like hone in on that, focus in on that. And yeah, I think it can kind of help with the fear of missing out, but and also it can maybe pave the way to have this really amazing experience with a bird if you just stick around with bird like I did with Myrtle.
Mhm. I love that. Kalina, anything you want to add in terms of your own experiences?
Yeah, well, nothing as exciting as seeing black-chinned hummingbird courtship displays, but I actually, looking back when I was in college, I we had an assignment in my animal behavior class where we needed to go out to the same spot and look at the changing of the seasons, look at how animals are like their behavior is changing as the days get shorter and it becomes winter. And looking back, it was very much a mindful experience for me. And I just remember coming back every week to this prairie, and there was a small patch of trees at the spot I was sitting in. And over time, starting in August, there were lots of goldfinches flying around. And then slowly, 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 the kind of the species diversity shifts. And suddenly, it's November and there's like 25 black-capped chickadees in one tree, making all sorts of noise and interacting with each other as they start to form their foraging flocks for the winter. And I kept notes at that time, partially because of the assignment, but it's something that I've kept doing since then. I usually am carrying one of these little notebooks around. Um, and these are waterproof, which is excellent if you're going to be nature journaling. But this is something I can just have in my pocket. And whenever I want to write something down, it's there. And so that has been a really important part of my own personal practice of mindful birding from that very first experience before I even had the words for it.
Mhm. You touch on something right there, Kalina, that actually Eric and I have talked about in conversations before, which is that, my introduction to birding was during college when I was first diagnosed with PTSD and was really struggling. And my college roommate, luckily, was somebody who came from a family of birders and introduced me to birding. And I had this moment recently when Eric and I were talking where I said, I think I was doing mindful birding long before I knew that's what it was or had a name for it. Or, it just oftentimes I think mindful birding for me wasn't something I set out to do, like, oh, very intentionally, I'm going to go and mindful bird today. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I do try to do that more nowadays, where I will actually, I've created a practice for myself of every single morning I get up, I make my cup of coffee, and I sit at my kitchen table and look out at the birds. Um, and just watch them while I drink my coffee. I don't immediately rush to work. I don't start on my phone. I try to just be present with whatever birds show up that day and watch them. And there's a particular sweetness, I think, to backyard birds, right? Like our ability to get to know them in a different way.
Mhm.
But I'm really in part I'm really aware that mindful birding was something that supported me because of my disability, and it wasn't something I did intentionally, and it wasn't something that somebody said like, oh, you should probably go mindful bird for some mental health and wellness. In fact, it was just that piece that I recognized that when I was paying deep attention to birds, my mind quieted, as all of us have mentioned in some way, and I was able to be present to the world in a way that engaged my senses without engaging my trauma and those like sort of narratives that I think are easily sort of uh, engaged, I guess. Um, I'm curious about how mindful birding you all think supports people with disabilities and other health concerns. Like, are there ways that you found yourself doing this practice really of mindful birding without ever having called it that? Eric, I know you have. Why am I even asking it in that question? It's like, yes, I know this is a thing. You talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think so, for me, coming from the perspective of somebody who has a mobility disability, I have muscular dystrophy, which means I use a big power wheelchair. It also means that I can get really super tired with a lot of bumps, so going down a hard packed dirt trail for a mile is just not in the cards for me, at least not anymore. I could do that, but I might spend 3 days in bed and I don't really want to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and so one of the ways that I have continued birding is stationary birding, which, really complements mindfulness in a way because it's like a sitting meditation. I mean, I'm in one spot and I'm just letting whatever um, happens happen. I mean, it might be birds that fly in and fly out. It might be distant songs or calls that I hear, and
Mhm.
um, or it might just be admiring the trees and just the nature around, be it, insects and
Mhm.
butterflies and that sort of thing. Um, so I think that mindful birding is and slow birding are very accessible for people who have mobility disabilities. And
Mhm.
I'm y'all are going to talk about how it's also kind of benefited you like with PTSD and other kind of neurodiverse experiences. But
Mhm.
yeah, for me, I think it's a very accessible way to bird for people with mobility disabilities. You don't have to go on a long trek. Plus, it
Mhm.
changes the priority from you try to find the species, try to seek out the birds, but mindful birding is about letting the birds come to you.
Sorry, I don't know what just happened.
Thanks
Oh,
for
it's okay.
muting. Appreciate it.
Sorry.
Yeah, just to repeat that point, I think it's mindful birding is not about seeking out the birds. It's about letting the birds come to you. And yeah, that's I think so. Yeah, I think it's accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Helena, you go.
Yeah. Definitely, it's certainly accessible for people with mobility disabilities. With my fibromyalgia, it's really up and down whether I'm going to have the energy to be able to go out and go hiking, because that is something I do love to do when I'm able to. But then there are times where that does end me up in bed for several days. So yeah, like being able to just sit somewhere is really nice for that too, if you're limited on energy. And for me, like, because I like to like get down on the ground, it allows me when I'm experiencing chronic pain to kind of just like put my body in a position that's comfortable to me
Yeah.
for a long period of time, which is not always the most like, typical, like, a lot of the time we're either standing up or like sitting in a chair, which is not necessarily the most comfortable when you have chronic pain and joint pain and all sorts of that kind of stuff. So like being able to like put my body in a position that's comfortable for me and to not have that judgment of like being around other people as well, because I tend to do this individually, although you can do it in groups, which is really great and wonderful. And I do lead groups on mindful birding. But I think that's really helpful in being able to like work with the pain, because that's a big part of my life, as well as like the mental health effects. Like, if you're like, anxiety can often be exacerbated by this go, look, we got to see all the birds, rushing around that people want to do often on various birding trips and outings where they're trying to get like, we have to get 25 species by noon. But
Yeah.
so that can really exacerbate the anxiety, and it makes it that can be inaccessible for a lot of people. So slowing down and saying, we're here and we're going to accept whatever birds come by and we'll appreciate them. That's a lot less anxiety inducing. So I think that it can be accessible for those kinds of mental health issues as well.
Totally agree. As somebody who is multiply disabled, both physically in terms of mobility and also in terms of invisible disabilities and mental health, one of the things that I love that you all are talking about is, the core of many folks' mindfulness practices is sit spot, right?
Mhm.
Is mindful birding. They introduce the very concept of a sit spot or a place where you go back to regularly. And Kalina, as you were describing, in watching the sort of seasons change, you observe what's around you and you do that using all of the different senses. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I feeling? The wind or the ground underneath me, in the ways that you can, because everybody has a different way of experiencing senses, and all of those are welcome and none of them are needed 100%. You know what I mean? Like when we're thinking about mindfulness, we use what's available to us. And the concept of a sit spot is such a freeing concept in some ways for those of us who do have ongoing mobility issues. I talk about this many times. I often, as I know probably both of you do, I often end up having to sort of navigate what is good for my physical health versus what is good for my mental health, because birding is good for my mental health, being in nature, being in the forest, but physically for my body, often that does mean it can be a really difficult recovery period, or it's simply not physically possible in that moment or that day, especially with variability of presentations of disability or symptoms. And so sit spots are like the most organic, beautiful way of paying deep attention to something and meeting folks' needs as people with chronic illness, fatigue, and ongoing disability. I want us to talk a little bit about, we've touched on lots of the ways that mindfulness helps reduce stress or improves well-being while birding. And I'd love for us to just touch a little bit on that, because some of the research you all that is coming out is just, it's mind-blowing to me. It is showing things like listening to birdsong for 6 minutes a day has a distinct regulating effect on our nervous systems. It's showing things like paying attention to birds for even a very short time helps to reduce stress and to promote mental wellness and cognitive ability. What are some of the ways that you all have experienced that, or that you've been hearing about in terms of research and wanted to, incorporate into the conversations you've had with people about mindfulness and mindful birding?
I think that for me, the primary benefit is what you've discussed about that kind of clearing all the noise and allowing me to be fully present with one bird and just kind of follow one bird. I think too, which this doesn't necessarily relate to stress, but well, in my primary occupation right now is as a writer, and I write about birds. And when I get stuck, the place I go is to the backyard, and often within 10 or 15 minutes, I get unstuck. I find where next I need to go in my writing, and that relieves the stress of not knowing what to write next a lot of the time. Um, so those are a few thoughts I have, but I'd like to hear what Kalina has.
Yeah, I think that's a really great, those are really great points. I think another thing is that it can really help, like from a PTSD perspective, like it can help you feel safer outside again, because often a big symptom that you can have with PTSD is tending to kind of cloister yourself in your house and have a lot of anxiety around going out, because it can activate the parts of your trauma. And so creating that safe and positive like experience every time where you see the birds and you observe the birds, I should say, and the birds are doing what they're doing, and there's no negative like action going on, that it can help you feel safer, like repeatedly going out and building that confidence back up. I think that's really helpful. And that's something I'm hoping to do a little bit more as the spring comes along. Working with some other like survivors to help them with like get this kind of benefit that I've experienced myself.
I love that so much. Yeah, go Eric.
I was going to say that too, that, kind of a little bit going off of that, but, we can do birding in our backyards. We can do birding really anywhere. You can do birding at a parking lot. You can do birding, out at a cafe. And so, you don't really need to put yourself kind of in a place where you don't feel unsafe. You don't need to necessarily go hit a trail by yourself early in the morning. You can bird from a window. Lately, I've been having to spend more time resting in bed, and so I enjoyed the birds, just listening to the birds from my bed. I've occasionally listened to birds from the toilet in the morning, like from regular parts of my, routine. A few weeks ago, I saw not an actual eastern phoebe, but the shadow of an eastern phoebe land on a stake outside of my window, and that was, it's amazing to be able to enjoy birds in all these different kinds of situations. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that. I think one of the things that is really terrific about mindful birding is it is available to you wherever you are. Birds are everywhere. And a couple of folks in the chat have been mentioning also technology based birding, which is such another level of access. Camera feeders and other kinds of technology assisted birding is pretty new and really amazing in terms of being able to bring the birds right to you, right? I love the toilet birding is the best. And Eric, I feel like you had a story. Actually, if anyone isn't familiar, Eric writes a really fantastic Substack newsletter at birdcitynews.substack.com. I put it in the chat. And am I remembering correctly? Didn't you get a lifer while you were sitting on the toilet not that long ago?
A blue-headed vireo. And I didn't know the song. I have my iPad when I'm, doing my business, and just opened up Merlin Sound ID, hit record, and it identified it immediately. It was a blue-headed vireo, which I've never seen. I've only heard it from the toilet. That's my one blue-headed vireo experience.
I remember you telling that story, and it just was like, yes. This is a person who is a birder in every way, and also it speaks to, for those of us with disabilities, sometimes the day-to-day activities that we undertake look really different than other folks, and having birding in all of those spaces is a really beautiful thing. I love it. What are some kinds of accessible birding practices and mindful birding practices that somebody might incorporate into their daily routine? We talked a little bit about sit spots, about noticing, oh my goodness, Valerie had a great horned owl from the toilet. That is amazing. First of all, who knew how many toilet birders there were in the world? I am loving this. I am here for this. Those of us birding from the toilet no longer feel alone. We can start a little group. But are there ways, I mean, clearly when we're talking about simple, accessible, mindful birding practices that you can incorporate, if you have a window in your bathroom, you can begin right there, right? Are there other things? I know I'll mention that last summer, actually end of summer, I did a mindful birding outing here in Iowa City, Iowa, which is where I am. And it actually ended up being such an invitation to people who were intimidated by the concept of joining a birding outing that was about listing or about identifying. We ended up with a completely different set of folks who joined us. And it was because they were really thrilled at the idea of being in community and paying deep attention to the world around us. And the entry point that was to birding for them. And so I'm wondering, Eric or Kalina, if you all have ways that you've incorporated it in outings, or ideas of what else you might want to share with this crew about how you can start.
I can jump in. So every month, my local Audubon chapter does a birding 101. So it's an outing that's invited, like it's open to the general public. It's specifically designed to teach people about birds who've never come out and, may not even have binoculars. We pass them out. But I often, I lead these almost every month. Because it's one of my favorite things to do. And I often will just pull us up to a spot where there's a bench, or there's a nice spot that we can stand off to the side, because it's a fairly busy trail that we teach these at. But we pull off to the side and we just stand there and we listen and we just wait for the birds to come out. And it's a really great way to like introduce that concept to entirely new people who are already, they're here because they want to learn. And it hopefully, if we um my idea is like, hopefully, by bringing this to new people, we can like build that in from day one, where they can enjoy it in such a way where you're taking it slower and you're not worried about, oh, I need to identify all of these birds. No, we can just slow down, and you don't even have to name them. Just listen and watch, or whatever you're able to do. I think it's a really wonderful experience to do that.
I love that.
That's awesome. I was going to also throw in there, the benefit of maybe doing some journaling. I'm not able to physically handwrite, so my version of journaling looks like I'm maybe out in the backyard watching things happen, and then I go uh to my office and then I write down what I saw. But I think it's a way that, and also like noticing specific details about an individual bird, like let's say a cardinal, which I mean we've all seen, probably thousands of cardinals, right? At least those of us in the eastern United States. But mention, did you see a female? Did you see a male? Maybe you saw a female singing, or maybe you saw a juvenile with that like really quite beautiful buffy coloration, and a dark bill, kind of exploring a bird bath for the first time, or one of the first times. I mean, I think noticing those specific details can really deepen our experience. And it's maybe a way that, like, a compromise between doing the listing and doing mindful birding. Maybe we can do a combination of both, keeping note of the birds we're seeing, but then also describing what each bird was like. And I think one of the ways that I fell in love with birds so much was because I had this daily journaling habit, and I just found myself writing about the birds all the time because that's just what really intrigued me. Another thing I was going to throw out there, for those that either want to bird by ear, can bird by ear, or are wanting to like, sharpen their ears for bird sounds. I mean, Merlin ID, Bird ID, such a huge resource, and it's fairly accurate. I mean, I'd say it's accurate about 90% of the time at identifying bird sounds. And I'll just, even though I might know what a lot of the bird sounds in my backyard are, I still sometimes I'll just have Merlin ID run for like 15 or 20 minutes. And not only will it help me identify bird sounds that I don't know, but just focusing on the spectrogram and really like say, we've got tons of great-tailed grackles here. But there's something about watching the spectrogram that really forces me to pay very close attention, notice the intricacies of each sound, and pretty soon you're just going to be totally enveloped, I think, if you do that activity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And, you know, part of it's so fun to make all these connections between all the things Birdability is doing right now, because we just had a workshop last Friday with John Muir Laws from the Wild Wonder Foundation, who taught us about paying deep attention to birds through sketching. But it was so fun because part of what that was about was curiosity, really, which is what I think you've both just touched on, like getting really curious about who is in our yards, who is nearby, but then the individual birds, curious about where they came from, what they've been eating, their behaviors, their coloration, their lives outside of that moment that we're getting to be in space and in community with them. And and that was such a fun thing. And one of the things I loved was his method of remembering for the sketching was he talks out loud to the birds and says, "Oh, you beautiful cardinal, look at you. You have this beautiful chin of black, and I had no idea that this was here and that was there." And it's a way of saying out loud and committing to memory. So then when you're drawing it, you're remembering those very things and getting curious about them. And it felt very much like a mindfulness practice to be able to do that. And so I wanted to draw that connection and say also that we will be putting that on YouTube. I can't put that link yet in the chat. So yeah, you are not the only one who shares affirmations with birds, Coral. This is I'm always like, "Oh, you're so beautiful. How did you get so gorgeous? Beautiful fox sparrow with your gorgeous, like streaky breast. Like, how did that happen? You're fantastic." Um, and I just wanted to name that because I sometimes think, especially, and it's funny when you were saying at the very beginning, Eric, about like we all can look at blue jays, but we want a bald eagle or a kestrel. And in fact, like J. Drew Lanham was somebody who I adore, an author. We're going to be reading one of his books, The Home Place, for Birdability Book Club coming up here in not too long. And he is a poet. He wrote Sparrow Envy and a number of other books of poems that I adore. And one of the things he said recently that just gutted me was he was talking to a bird in his poem, and he said, "Should I wait for you to be a rarity before I notice your beauty?" And it just reminded me so much of the ways that the our day-to-day beauty eludes us sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't notice it, right? And so that I think is also a part of mindful birding, that noticing what's right here and the beauty of that. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, Michelle said. Yeah, Galina.
Yeah. You said that, and this is a poem I wrote about a robin I saw the other day, actually. So I was, even like little moments, you build them into your day. I was getting out of my car, I park under a big old oak tree, and the robin was up there singing. And so it was just something that filled me with such emotion that I had to like grab a notepad from inside my apartment and come back out and just pay attention to that bird. So yeah.
I love that. I love that.
I was going to throw out there, there's a birder in Austin, Victor Emanuel, and he started some, nature guide tours. And I guess one of his things that he's told people is like, you can always notice something new about a common bird. And I'm actually taking a bird class right now, and one of the activities was describe a blue jay. And they didn't show a photo of a blue jay. We had to describe from memory a blue jay. And it's amazing. We've seen those birds so many times, but when you're asked to describe it, suddenly my mind was almost blank. And, it's like I completely missed the fact that, blue jays have white tips to their secondary feathers, but not their primary feathers. They've got white tips at the sides, of their tail, and their tail is striped blue and black, and there's so much there, and it's amazing. It's like I know what a blue jay is. I could identify it no problem, but how closely was I actually looking to the plumage pattern? And so yeah, I think that that's a useful kind of mindset to go into birds. Like, try to notice something new every single time, and you probably will.
Yeah. Noticing those birds that are near us and noticing them in really intentional ways connects us to the beauty of the world and the beauty that is literally right around us in whatever way. And when I say noticing and beauty, I don't just mean visually. I also mean listening. And Eric and Kalini, you've both talked about listening to birds and observing them in that way, and Kalina being so moved by the sound of a robin recently, right? That like it meant a poem poured out of you. Like, I love that. I just think it's such an important reminder to us that there are so many ways in which the world around us sustains us and sustains our connection to beauty, and I wanted to just put a pin in that, you know what I mean, and remind us that too is mindful birding. Gary says that sometimes leaders miss common birds when they're doing bird surveys because they're so used to hearing them. Like it doesn't even register in the same way anymore, right? And I love this. Michelle says that a friend of theirs in the slow birding community says it's not what you know, it's what you notice. Which, yes, to that deep noticing. Um, part of what I adore about this conversation and about so many of the opportunities that we have when we're in community together is to check our own experiences with others, right? Like, how do you do this? What has been for you all sort of the role that community has played in mindful birding?
Oh, I've learned so much just from chatting with other people, in casual conversation, like the ones that we have in our monthly Birdability captain meetings. As well as I had the opportunity to go to a what's the word? I guess a webinar hosted by Bird Diva.
Oh,
And
yes.
she talked a lot about different techniques that some I'd already known about, and getting able to hear that from someone who's made, a whole like curriculum out of this was very helpful, and getting to talk with other people who were starting to implement this in different places in their mindful birding journey has been so wonderful and so enlightening, and it gives you so many different ideas about what you can do.
I want to say that a while ago, I put into the chat the Mindful Birding Network's website. It is a terrific network of folks focusing on mindful birding for the very fact that it changes how we experience the world and allows us to be present in these different ways. And it invites new people into birding with us. So I just wanted to mention that. I know that Bridget, the Bird Diva, is somebody who participates there. There are so many others as well around the country, and they have also mindful birding events that you can check out. Highly recommend that. How about you, Eric? Community, what role does community play for you in mindful birding?
So one thing I really love about the big sits, in addition to them being accessible to me, is that it allows me to also be a part of the birding community, be around fellow birders, and when I had to stop kind of going on the birding field trips, one of the biggest things I missed was being able to connect to fellow birders, talk about birding stuff with fellow birders. So to be able to be in a space, like say a big sit where it's intentional, we're going to sit here, I feel very included, and I feel like I can benefit from the social aspects as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. One of the things that was really joyful to me in last April, I got to go to Austin, where Eric is, and actually for a birdability event. And even in the midst of this very accessible event, Eric and I found ourselves with just another person or two gravitating to just sitting together, right? In part because there was so much we wanted to talk about and ask each other about, but also I think we bird in very similar ways. Like we would be talking and then instantly Eric would be like, wait, did you hear that? What was that? I think that was and we would both
Uh,
stop everything and listen deeply. And we found, I think, kinship in that way of birding. And it was such an important thing for me that even within an accessible bird outing, uh, still, I was like, Eric, let's just sit under this and be together and listen.
Mhm. I think it's important to maybe say as well that mindful birding is not exclusive from like a listing type or citizen
No.
science oriented birding. I think for me, mindful birding actually is the foundation for wanting to learn more. It's kind of where one of the places where our curiosity starts, because first you hear the sound and you're like, oh, that's such a cool sound, and then you want to know what it is. And so that mindfulness can actually lead to maybe not a twitching type listing, but like just a deeper knowledge and you wanting to learn more about birds.
Absolutely. Yeah. The way that I generally do things, I honestly, if I'm going to be doing birding outside, I don't really like to bring my phone and use eBird app. I actually really prefer to use my notebook. And so that allows me a lot more freedom to like play and write down, because I can have a page where it's like, here's my tally. Um, and I've been doing that forever because I started doing bird surveys, since I am also a professional ornithologist. But so I'll have a page with my tallies, and then I'll have like cool observations, the journal, the aspect of it that's more nature journally, or I'll sketch a little bird in here. And I think that is, if you're able to write, by hand, that's something that I find really, really wonderful, that you can kind of meet the two in the middle. And then I can come back to the car and the computer and type it all up. And, it's really something that's, there's a lot of flexibility in it, that you can really make it what you want it to be. And this is one thing that I really like to do.
Yeah.
And I had one other thing.
Yeah.
And this comes from basically my birding mentor, the person who taught me how to do this. And it's really informed a lot of my birding activity since, is that when you are outside and if you're able to hear and see, is that you hear the bird and then you find where it is and then you look at the bird. And so you're connecting that hearing to the sight. And that really can be something wonderful, because then you're hearing it and you're seeing it come out of its mouth, and you can make the connection, and then you get excited. And for me, a lot of that is, oh my gosh, what is this bird? I need to remember all of this right now so I can find out what to call it. And then I usually go down some kind of rabbit hole finding out about the bird's entire life history, because that's my nerdy thing. But yeah, like
Yeah.
using all of your senses if you can, even like if there's big birds nearby and you feel the wind moving from their flapping, or like the splashing of water on your skin from water birds. As much as you can use as many of your senses as possible, I think that's a really wonderful way to connect.
So much so. Thank you for that. And then to also notice how it makes you feel, because that can be part of it too. What does this bring up for me emotionally? What am I feeling? Which creates new neural pathways for us, right? And is such a beautiful way of honoring also that we're a part of the natural universe, that we're noticing, but we're also deeply enmeshed and in feeling based on the relationship that we have with that bird. You all, this has been so wonderful. I can't believe that we are at time already. I'm like, could we just have another hour, please, to keep chatting? I am really grateful to both of you for being here, and sharing your experiences. And this was really meant to be a place of community and curiosity. And we hope to do more conversations moving forward about mindful birding, and especially accessible mindful birding, and thinking about how that works to really create a way forward that hopefully makes us fall in love with birds even more, because when we fall in love with birds, we fall in love with the world, and we want to protect it and care for it and each other, hopefully. So I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you again to Pro Bono ASL for your interpretation today. Thank you to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for their support of the Birdability Outreach Program, and of which this webinar series is a part. And we look forward to being in spaces with you all again soon. Check out our website. Feel free to email me at cat@birdability.org if you have ideas about how else we could support you in your birding. And we hope that you have a really mindful birdie kind of week, everyone. Take good care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.